And I love them because they're actually working. They're doing something for themselves. And I love every one of them. And for us, this is what I want to see for Aboriginal people. The only person who can better your life is not the government, it's not the voice, it's you. You're the only person who makes the difference. Authorised by Noongai Warren Mundine, Australians for Unity, Canberra.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to an evening with Senator Jacinta Nampijinpa Price. A little bit of housekeeping before we get the show on the road, hey. Complimentary drinking water will be available from the main bar at the rear of the auditorium. Please be aware that the male and female and disabled restrooms are located immediately to the rear on my right of the auditorium, near the main point of entry at the top of the stairs. In the unlikely event of an emergency evacuation, please use the fire escape closest to you. There are fire escapes in each corner of the room, on my left, on my right. I feel like a air stewardess, it's awesome, but for 1,400 people. Venue attendants will be at each fire escape to guide you. The assembly area is directly opposite Rumour's front doors in the main car park. At the conclusion of the event this evening, please expect minor traffic delays as you leave the vicinity of the car park. Very minor. Smoking area is outside the ground floor front concourse. Venue policy is to remain seated throughout the course of the event. Anyway, I'm sure by now you're well aware of the fact that I am not Senator Price. My name is Ben Yong, and I have the absolute privilege of owning one of the region's premium marketing agencies, Wolf Marketing. But more importantly, thank you very much. That's my accountant over there. Thanks, mate. But more importantly, I am a husband to a gorgeous wife who is also here this evening. She's also my business partner. Yes, she definitely wears the pants in both business partnership and life partnership. And we've been married and in business for 4 years. We're lucky enough to have a beautiful 1-year-old son, and we have another baby due in 4 weeks' time. Oh, wow, thank you. Am I sleep deprived? Severely. But I'm not sure if you've noticed, but surprise, I'm also Asian. My mum is Filipino and my dad is Malaysian Chinese. They met and got married in Port Moresby, Papua New Guinea, and soon fell pregnant with little old me. It was decided that they weren't going to give birth to me in PNG in the 90s. It was definitely far more comfortable to give birth in Australia. And also a sneaky way to get an Australian citizenship for your kid. Keep that one up your sleeve. But the next question is where in Australia? As I've recently discovered, having people around you to navigate the early stages of parenthood keeps you from absolutely losing your mind. And being foreigners, they only had a handful of connections in Australia. And for some random reason, they had a few connections in Toowoomba. So, I was born in Toowoomba, went to school here, have a fantastic, thriving community around me, and have the absolute privilege of raising a family here in Toowoomba. So, why the long-winded backstory? Because the beautiful life that I've been able to build as a second-generation immigrant man has been founded upon embracing the Australian way of life. The Australian way of life where you laugh with your mates. The Australian way of life that fosters courage, ingenuity, and endurance in the human spirit. The Australian way of life where you help your mates, regardless of their race, religion, or gender. The Australian way of life that is built on common sense. But we live in a day and age where this way of life, honestly, is constantly under threat. And let me be clear, the voice is an absolute threat to the Australian way of life. The voice is risky, ineffective, costly, and will only divide this great nation more. But the brilliance of the voice is that it's very difficult to oppose. And if you dare do, you're labelled a racist bigot. Thankfully, there are brave and courageous few who can stand in the gap and not just speak up against the voice, but speak and drive change in the hearts and minds of our great nation. And tonight, as you all know, we have the absolute honour of hearing from the brave and courageous Senator Jacinta Price. There are many reasons why Senator Price has garnered the admiration and respect of many Australians. But why do I like her? She's genuine. She calls it for how it is. She protects common sense principles and she protects the Australian way of life. Ladies and gentlemen, in just a brief moment, we'll hear from Senator Price, to which we'll be all upstanding and give an amazing round of applause. But would you join with me in turning your eyes to the screen?
You are looking at Mangili, Jacinta Nampijinpa Price. I was born in Darwin in the Northern Territory. I have crocodile dreaming from the top end, Irkapai, Chikapanga, but I grew up in Alice Springs. My family are Warrapri, predominantly from the community of Yuendamu, where my mum's from. My dad is from Newcastle, New South Wales. He's a white fella, and it's interesting growing up in a household with two different cultures, but recognising what we have in common was always really important for us as a family. And while I might be growing up with Warrapri culture and modern Australian culture, I belong to this world, just like all other human beings belong to this world, like all other Australians belong to Australia. They're the values that I was brought up with. For me and Colin, as husband and wife, and our boys, and being a blended family, you know, we're a family. Yeah, we come from two different backgrounds, but ultimately it's love that's brought us together, that's ensured that we've been able to bring our boys up in a household that's cared for them, that's loved them. They are now young men creating their own lives, and we couldn't be any prouder than what we are as parents, knowing that they are good men, and there's much for them to offer the world. And it's not because of their ethnicity, but it's because they're decent human beings, and we feel very proud that we've been able to provide the love to give them that.
People question my love for Jacinta because she's a conservative politician, which is ridiculous, because they're not looking at the reason why we're together. Well, it's love. We are one. I will not argue and debate her lived experience, which she's seen and heard with her own ears and eyes. I can't argue that. You've got to live and walk and talk the talk.
Growing up in a place like Alice Springs, a lot of my family experienced violence, experienced substance abuse, alcoholism, and those sorts of things. You know, I grew up in a culture understanding that violence was very much accepted. I spent a lot of time in the town camps where my family lived, and I saw violence firsthand, and I often had to rescue young family members throughout my life, you know, to help put them in better situations or comfort them myself. And I just got to a point in my life where I said, I don't want to see any more suffering. I don't want to see kids suffering in an environment like that. I don't want to see women suffering or men suffering in that sort of environment. So I was very much encouraged by my community to throw my hat in the ring to have a go on Alice Springs Town Council. The wonderful part about that was actually being sworn in by my own mother, who was Minister for Local Government at the time, and of the understanding that it doesn't matter what background you come from. As a human being, if you have the drive and the passion you can become what it is that you want to become. And this country certainly provides that opportunity for you. My mother could be born under a tree if her first language is not English, and she can grow up to become a minister of the Crown. Well, then I could certainly step up and be a counsellor in my community, that's for sure. I'm obliged to fight for some of our most vulnerable people, those that are in remote communities, those whose first language is not English. That is what I have done, and that is what I will continue to do to improve the lives of some of our most marginalised Australians. That's what keeps me going. You know, I might be a survivor of domestic violence myself. I might have experienced adversity at some point in my life. That's not entirely who I am. I am who I am because of the things that I've achieved in my life, because I can watch my children now becoming young men and establishing themselves in the world and being confident in who they are. And that is all that I want to aim for in supporting others, to feel that way, to be confident human beings who can stand on their own 2 feet and create their own destiny. What's important to me is that we don't divide ourselves along the lines of race in this country. I don't want to see my family divided along the lines of race, because we are a family of human beings, and that's the bottom line.
I never understood love properly until I came to Australia, because Australia allowed me to become something new. It gave me the opportunity to look at me, and it showed me that I could be something better. Now, when we build a home, we have this cornerstone that's there, and that takes and holds everything up. I feel that what Australia gave me, that cornerstone that holds up that thing that I love dearly, is being chipped away at. And it scares me that my home might fall apart, and anybody else coming to Australia will feel that they are not as equal and will not have the same opportunities that I had. And that's not fair. I believe in that cornerstone. I believe in that cornerstone. And I believe in the local fella, because I believe in my kids. And I see my kids grow up to be men who believe in themselves, who will one day be fathers, who will one day teach their kids, who will then teach their kids. And our family is a blended thing. Our family is what Australia is. Australia is that thing where it doesn't matter where you're from in this planet. You can stand in any country in the world and you can say, you could be Aussie, mate. You could be Aussie. I'm quite anxious about how my career will go after me being here saying these things, but I'm here because I love my family. And a line going through my family, I won't stand for that. I won't stand for that.
I was hiding in the dark, looking out for my heart, living in a world full of fear.
I had my head in the clouds, but my feet on the ground. Not sure if I was ready to feel this way.
Lay down your arms
I will lay me down.
and let me in.
I will let you in.
We've broken all the rules, now it's time to live again.
Later this year, politicians will be asking us to vote on a major change to our constitution. They want to establish a so-called voice to parliament. This is a really big deal. The constitution is the rule book for governing the country, and they want the rules to change. This is a massive change, and it will mean that some Australians are treated differently based on the colour of their skin. I'll be voting no, because this will not unite us, this will divide us.
It's here where I belong.
Authorised by Matthew Sheehan, Advance Australia, Canberra.
Ladies and gentlemen, would you please be upstanding for the moment we've all been waiting for? It is my absolute privilege to welcome to the stage a woman that is absolutely worth a roaring applause for her ongoing bravery, courage, and the incredible fight she's putting up for our great nation. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome with me Senator Jacinta Price.
Now, I'm not sure whether that was my aunt who said she'd do that or somebody else. My goodness, what an absolute blessing. Firstly, can I just say thank you to Toowoomba. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here this evening to give me the further strength and the confidence to get out and fight on behalf of Australians for Australia, for our country. I want to recognise and say thank you to my wonderful colleague who you'll hear from, Garth Hamilton. Please give him a round of applause also. For extending an invitation for me to come and to address Toowoomba. And I also want to take a moment to acknowledge and pay my respects to each and every proud Australian here in the room tonight. So thank you. You know, it is a very significant time in our country's history right now, the referendum that we're currently faced with as a nation. I would have to say is probably the most divisive referendum that we've been confronted with in our nation's history. And for me, it is a passion, an absolute passion of mine to stand up for our wonderful Australian values, the values that each and every single one of us, from the time we became a nation, that we've created together. Whether we come from the first Australians in this country, whether we come from those who were dispossessed of their land and brought over in chains as convicts. And can I say that makes up my ancestry. That makes up my ancestry, from the first Australians to those who were dispossessed of their land and brought over here to create this country when it was a colony. Whether it is those of us from that heritage and also from our migrant community, those that have recently called Australia home. We have created together our wonderful shared Australian values, a wonderful shared Australian culture. And that has been slowly eroded of recent times. It's been slowly eroded away. So for me, this referendum is not just about an amendment in our constitution that divides us along the lines of race, but this has been the efforts of those eroding our values and our culture. This is their referendum. This is their yes vote to continue down this divisive path. So to stand up against that, for me, is to stand up for our wonderful Australian values, for what it means to be an Australian, to maintain who we are, but to be proud to call ourselves Australian once again. That's what this referendum and this fight means for me. So I'm deeply heartened to know that I can come to a wonderful community like Toowoomba and that almost 1,500 people can turn up to be part of this fight. So from the bottom of my heart, I am deeply grateful for your support. I'm deeply grateful for the support of Australians right around this country who get how important it is to stand up, to draw a line in the sand and to say, you know what, enough is enough. We can't continue down this path of destruction. We can't stand by and watch as our children are being taught ideology in our schools, are being taught to be embarrassed and ashamed to call themselves Australian. We come from a country of opportunity. And I'm a living example of what it means to take those opportunities with both hands and to make what I need to make with it, not just for myself, my family and my community, but for the country altogether. A mother of 4 boys, a proud blended family. 3 of those boys I gave birth to, and the youngest one, sometimes I feel like I have given birth to him because there's a lot of me in him. But he is my husband's son, and we have a wonderful blended family that we brought together some many years ago now. We brought our kids up together. My husband is an Australian citizen, but originally from Scotland. And so our children have an abundance of, wonderful heritage to draw from. Between our boys, they have a Mauritian grandparent on each side, in fact. So they have Malay, French, Creole, Indian, Chinese, Irish, Scottish, Welsh, German, Scandinavian, Warlpiri. I did suggest to them that they could maybe one day make a land claim on every continent on the face of the earth. But these are our kids, and guess what? They're Australian. And guess what? We're not alone. Because many Australians have so many different backgrounds to draw from. And as my husband often says, you could go to any corner of the world and you could point to someone and say, hey mate, you could be Aussie. That is the beauty of our country. And the opportunities that have come my way and my family's way have always existed. My mother was born under a tree in a remote community. She grew up, English was not her first language, it was her third language. She grew up in the cultural confines of Warlpiri traditional culture. She was expected to abide by traditional cultural norms, to become a second wife in an arranged marriage, and she rebelled. She went on to get an education because she wanted a way out of the circumstances that were oppressing her. So education was the key for her. My grandparents supported her with that. She went on to become a Minister of the Crown in the Territory Government. And of course, when I had the wonderful opportunity of being voted on to Alice Springs Town Council, I had my very own mother, who was the Minister for Local Government, swear me in at my ceremony. So here we have a Warrapy woman, her daughter who became the Deputy Mayor of Alice Springs. Then this Warrapy woman was a minister in the Territory Government at one point. But then her daughter, myself, has gone on to become a senator in federal parliament. And also now the Shadow Minister for Indigenous Australians. And we didn't need an amendment to our Constitution, a voice to Parliament, because of our racial heritage, to work hard and get to where we've got. Our sons understand that they have every opportunity in this country to be what it is that they want to be. But it starts with being proud of oneself and knowing who you are in your community and in your country. It starts with being educated appropriately. That's what it starts with. And that's what we need to instill in our children once again going forward. So as you can tell, I'm quite passionate about this voting no to the referendum. To this voice to Parliament. Because there are a number of reasons, obviously. Aside from the fact that it's going to divide us along the lines of race in our nation, it also suggests, and this is what the Prime Minister firmly believes, the Prime Minister firmly believes that Indigenous Australians, as a group of Australians, we are inherently disadvantaged for no other reason but because of our racial heritage. I'd call that a racial stereotype. And I thought we were at the point in our nation where we railed against racial stereotypes. But our Prime Minister is trying to enforce this. Those who are trying to push a yes vote onto Australians are trying to enforce this idea that we, as a group of Australians, are inherently disadvantaged because of no other reason but because of our race. The truth is, the further you move away from a capital city, the more marginalised Australians become, and that's everybody. But of course, our most marginalised exist in remote communities that are out of sight, out of mind from people like our Prime Minister. Our Prime Minister doesn't even like to visit these particular communities. And they are those whose first language is not English, who still live within cultural confines. They are amongst some of our most marginalised. So the gap exists between them and the rest of Australia, including Indigenous Australians who are doing pretty well for ourselves. I mean, I know I'm doing all right. I know if I look toward those who are advocating for a yes vote, that the proponents of the yes campaign, well, I think they're doing all right for themselves as well, aren't they? The bottom line is they should be sharing their knowledge and understanding of their success with our marginalised. Because any human being can take the opportunity to become successful in this country. And that's been demonstrated over and over and over again. I know my good friend and colleague, Garth Hamilton, when he spoke on the floor of Parliament about why he opposes the voice to Parliament, he talked about a remarkable individual, a Queenslander, the very first Indigenous Australian to be elected to the Senate, Neville Bonner. Can I say good on you, Queensland, for providing Neville to Australia. I know that Garth, I know that myself, we are continuing with his legacy, with Neville Bonner's legacy. to be treated the same as all other Australians, as individuals in our own right, to not be singled out as separate to Australians, Indigenous Australians, requiring special measures. We're continuing to fight for what true equality is all about. In 1967, our country held a referendum which was about providing equality to Indigenous Australians, to be recognised as citizens equal to everybody else, to have access to education equally, just like everybody else in this country. Australia overwhelmingly supported Indigenous Australians at our 1967 referendum toward equality. We've gained equality. We've been there. We've done that. This proposal, the Voice proposal, is about constitutionally enshrining inequality in our Constitution. It's suggesting, again, that we as Indigenous Australians are different from everybody else, that we need special measures. In fact, it contradicts itself, because the claim is that it's going to support some of our most marginalised Indigenous Australians, and that by doing so, to close the gap, the only way to do it is to make an amendment to our Constitution and inserting an unknown entity into that Constitution to do so. But ultimately, if we want to see improvements in the lives of our most marginalised, and if we gain those improvements, we wouldn't need a voice to Parliament anymore. In fact, as Shadow Minister for Indigenous Australians, I would hope to think that one day, when we have used our common sense to apply policy and legislation that actually does support our most marginalised and focus on them solely and not blanket all Indigenous Australians as marginalised. But if we can do that, if we can achieve that, we wouldn't even need a portfolio like the Ministry for Indigenous Australians, because we'd just be treated equally as Australians. That, to me, is what true equality looks like. It's also been suggested by our Prime Minister. We've all heard the emotional blackmail. If not now, then when? We've all heard the lines, the talking points. You know, this has to be done for... It's remarkable that I can stand in the Senate, on the floor of the Senate, and be told, this is about First Nations Australians. And I'm thinking, who are these First Nations people? Are they Canadians? Because I'm not a First Nations person. I'm an Australian. And as far as I know, the Indigenous Australians that I've spoken to in communities across the country, in regional Australian remote communities, they too regard themselves as Australian. And a great number of them did not agree to the Uluru Statement from the Heart. They didn't agree to that. And they've asked me, they've said, Jacinta, we voted you in. We work hard, we pay our taxes, we're the taxpayer. We voted you in because we want you to be our representative in federal parliament. If we've got an issue, we expect to come to you or to anybody, regardless of racial heritage, that is in federal parliament to advocate on our behalf. That's what they've said to me. Clearly, when the Prime Minister says this is about listening, he is not doing that at all. We don't need a voice to Parliament, we need ears in Canberra. That's what we need. And I think it was evident when the Prime Minister made his trip to the Bush Summit held in Tamworth. He wasn't expecting an Aboriginal man in the audience to put it to him that he did not support the voice of Parliament. And why are you doing this, Prime Minister? because he hasn't been listening. He is listening to those that he's surrounded himself with, those that tell him the things he wants to hear. But he's not listening to everyday Australians, Indigenous or non-Indigenous. He's not doing that. I'm making damn sure that he cannot get away without listening, whether it's from the floor of the Senate whether it's my colleagues in the House of Representatives. We're making sure that this government hears from everyday Australians. So don't feel like you have to align with the emotional blackmail, the rhetoric that we're hearing from the yes camp. If not now, then when? You know, this is the only way we can move forward. There are other ways to move forward, but it requires hard work. It requires common sense. It requires unpacking the current system that exists. And honesty. Absolute honesty has to be at the forefront. Not truth-telling, but telling the truth. Going forward, you know, it's been suggested to me, oh, well, Jacinta, why don't you support this? What other things can be done? Everything's been tried. No, everything hasn't been tried. You know, it's suggested that a voice to Parliament is something brand new. We've never done this before. No, we have created expensive bureaucracies over and over. Yes. And largely they've not worked. Putting it in the Constitution does not magically make it work. It doesn't do that. In fact, it has the potential to damage our democracy by putting it in our Constitution. What we haven't done is we haven't conducted a forensic audit into the billions of dollars that are spent year in, year out that instead of supporting our most marginalised has propped up an ever-growing industry. Proponents of the voice, there's one particular individual who has been responsible over the years for $550 million that is supposed to be about addressing disadvantage. So we know that this is what needs to be done. We need to fix the system that currently exists. We need to be brave or wise, perhaps wise, better than brave, to actually do the hard work, to pull it apart, to say, right, what's been working, what hasn't been working, who is actually responsible within this industry for the billions of dollars and no outcomes, and hold them to account so that they don't continue to do it over and over again. That's what we haven't done yet. But that is what I'll be fighting for going forward, for better outcomes for our most marginalised. That is what we need to do. And not just our most marginalised, but for all Australians. Because as I said, marginalised Australians exist in it, and they're not to one particular, they don't exist in one particular group. They exist across the board. We need to start serving Australians on the basis of need and not on the basis of race. So tonight, I hope that from tonight, I can make sure, Garth can make sure, that every single one of you is equipped with the knowledge and the evidence and the facts that you need to stand up, draw a line in the sand on behalf of all of us as proud Australians, to argue why we should be supporting our country better and our most marginalised better by saying no. why we shouldn't be relegating Indigenous Australians to an entity that is unknown, that is risky, that is divisive, and that is permanent. Imagine being told, because of your race, if you've got an issue, you know what, it's too hardball for the government to deal with. Go and talk to the Voice about it, because that's your special entity based on your race. The Minister of the Day doesn't want to hear about it, take it to the Voice instead. And imagine the trouble you have to go through that middleman to try and allow your voice to be heard in Parliament. I don't want to be relegated to that because of my racial heritage, and we shouldn't treat any Australian in this way. So I truly hope that after tonight, you can feel confident in knowing that you're not bloody racist because you vote no. And that ultimately you're here because you give a damn about this country and about the well-being of all Australians. That's what this is about. So on that note, once again, I want to thank you all from the bottom of my heart. I think we're looking forward now. It's probably 60 days until the referendum. We're seeing corporate Australia doing ridiculous things. Qantas painting, yes, on their couple of their aeroplanes, providing free flights to the Yes campaign, even though they've got $30 million in their coffers already. They need free flights to get around the country while the rest of Australia has to deal with the cost of living crisis, while people in regions who need to get to the big cities for medical issues have to fork out to Qantas because they like to make sure that Australians pay top dollar for their flights. But they're going to allow an elite group of individuals in this country who aren't disadvantaged have free flights to get around the country to effectively push a yes vote to divide us as a nation. Shame on Qantas. And shame on the corporates. When Australia turns around and votes no, they're going to have a lot to answer for. That's all I can say. And with that, we'll be moving on to the next part of the evening, but thank you very much.
Please be upstanding for Jacinta Price, ongoing bravery, service to this nation. Thank you so much. Thank you. Amazing. Well, again, thank you so much, Senator. Love that line. You're not bloody racist for voting no. Taking that home. But also for speaking up and standing up for every Australian in this nation and us regional folk. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd also like to acknowledge Garth Hamilton, our federal member, and his beautiful wife, Louise Hamilton, their team, Senator Price's team, and the Groom FDC for putting on such a fantastic evening. I'm sure you can all agree. On your seats, you would have noticed this blue booklet, which is Garth's speech in Parliament addressing his polite but firm no on The Voice. It's a fantastic speech, definitely worth a read and a share. We'll be moving on to our next segment, a Q&A with Senator Price and Garth Hamilton. These questions are frank questions that have all been on our minds, and I'm very excited to hear some frank answers as well, which I'm sure you're definitely not going to shy away from, Senator. But before we do, would you please welcome with me Garth Hamilton to the stage.
ladies and gentlemen, there is no tougher act to follow in Australia right now, so forgive me. I know we talk about equality, but this is by far and away my superior when it comes to leadership on this issue. So if you join me, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, when the voice was first raised, this is my father down the front, by the way, everybody. It's a family affair tonight. When the voice was first raised, I opposed it on principle. I don't believe in separating people on the basis of race. I don't believe in giving people different rights and responsibilities in our constitution on the basis of race. I think that's wrong. And I said that very early on to Jacinta, and I think we formed a bit of a consensus amongst the party. But what happened very quickly was a lot of people had a lot of questions about what the voice was, and a lot of people in my electorate wrote to me with these questions. So I wrote to the Minister, Linda Burney, inviting her to Toowoomba. I did, and it was a very nice letter. It really was. No, unfortunately, she didn't say yes. She ignored me for 6 months. And then I raised it in Parliament that she'd stated that she would work with anyone who wanted to engage in the voice, and I reminded her kindly that I had an outstanding invite. At that point, I did get a response, which was, wait for it, she'll think about it. So, unfortunately, the Minister won't be here to answer these questions, but I'm so grateful, Jacinta, that you have come to Toowoomba. And I hope you've had a little bit of a spell. The vocal cord has been given a bit of a relax, but I've got some questions, and some of these have even come tonight for you. So, please, come on back up. You've got much more work to do yet. So let's start. Jacinta, in your view, what are the consequences of a successful yes vote in the referendum?
Where do I start? Well, firstly, there is the fact that you and I will have to fight hard within Parliament to attempt to establish an entity that is the least damaging, I guess. If a yes vote were to get up, this voice entity would have the constitutional right to challenge decisions made in Parliament. Well, not just in Parliament, but when you consider the executive is not just federal Parliament. The executive is the bureaucracy. It is government agencies. It is also local government, state governments, parliaments, territory as well. And so if there is draft legislation of any kind, really, I mean, it's been suggested that they would only focus on issues that affect Indigenous Australians, but as far as I'm concerned, Indigenous Australians are Australians, like everybody else. So there is not an issue that wouldn't affect Indigenous Australians. So therefore, they would have the constitutional right to challenge any bit of legislation which has the potential to hold, hold parliaments to ransom, hold them up from making decisions for the benefit of Australians. And if I give you an example, I drafted a bill to reinstate alcohol restrictions in parts of the Northern Territory when they had been lifted because of legislation that had sunsetted in the Northern Territory. And the consequences, I told the federal government that the consequences are going to be absolutely destructive when those restrictions are lifted. And sure enough, they were. And so the Territory government had to scramble to try to cobble something together to put restrictions back in place. But my bill, if the voice determined, no, we can't possibly have alcohol restrictions in vulnerable communities, and they wanted to challenge that, they could effectively take me to court over that decision, to the High Court. And depending on who the judge is, there might be an activist judge, might rule in the favour of the voice. So there are so many ways that this could be very destructive going forward when it comes to decision making for our country. But that's one issue. I think, there's been talk of, AUKUS, the AUKUS deal when it comes to our national security. The idea now that, our submarines are nuclear energy submarines. The Voice might say, we don't like the idea of that because, you've got to put that waste somewhere and we don't want that anywhere on our land. There are so many different decisions that they could have an impact on. And I think there's another risk also involved. So for a lot of communities that I'm engaged with, Indigenous communities, there are a lot of concerned, vulnerable people in those communities because some of those communities have been run by individuals who, let's say they're only in power because they're often the most aggressive in those communities. They have bullied their way into positions of power. And this entity would certainly provide an environment for those sorts of things to take place. And that to me is completely and utterly against what we have established as a democracy in our country.
Absolutely. Jacinta, I get this one quite a bit. What was ATSIC, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Commission? Was it effective in pursuing its mandates? And do you think the Voice would be better, worse, or completely the same?
Well, the problem with ATSIC was that it was completely ineffective, and there were allegations of corruption, fraudulent behaviour, there were allegations of sexual assault, also within the organisation. And so it was a bipartisan decision with the Labor government at the time who decided, no, it was the Howard government, it was under Howard, that's right it was, but it was a bipartisan decision and Labor had supported it at the time to dismantle ATSIC because it was ineffective, it was wasteful, and it wasn't providing the outcomes that it was supposed to provide. And we don't want to see that again. I mean, at the moment, we've got the NIAA, the National Indigenous Aboriginal Agency, and that's funded just over $4 billion a year, and effectively their networks spread across the country are there to provide advice, to engage, consult with communities, Indigenous communities, and provide advice back to the government, to Parliament. So effectively, we've got a mechanism in place already, but in their recent audit, it's been demonstrated that their, I think, the fraud and compliance framework is not as effective as it should be. So they aren't determining whether funding's being spent properly, as it is already in the current, organisations that exist. So given we've got that entity there and it's not firing on all cylinders, why then would we want to create a whole new one to place over the top of that exists now?
Thank you. I think we're going to get pretty full answers from Jacinta tonight. This is wonderful. Thank you. Let's talk to, I think we've all seen the picture of Mr Albanese in the T-shirt, Voice, Treaty, Truth, dancing away to Midnight Oil. And it's raised a lot of questions. Jacinta, what is meant by treaty and reparations, and what do they have to do with the Voice?
So, this kerfuffle about treaty and the Uluru Statement from the Heart. Well, we know that the Uluru Statement from the Heart, the statement itself is the cover page, and that there's another 25 pages behind it, which provide the wishes and the hopes of the Voice proponents. But he stated that he supports the Uluru Statement in full, which talks about treaty and reparations and the term makarata. So treaty is something that absolutely, we as the coalition cannot support. Obviously, you can't hold treaties. There was no declaration of war to begin with. You can't hold treaties with your own citizens either. And in terms of reparations, well, why should non-Indigenous Australians alive today be held accountable for what occurred in our nation's history 200 years ago? And be expected to, you know, provide reparations for people like me. I mean, I don't need reparations from anybody. And I know that, you know, it's a ridiculous concept to suggest that this is what should happen in modern Australia right now. But the term makarata also, you know, again, our Prime Minister likes to suggest that the amendment to the Constitution is a modest proposal. It's just a nice, small, sort of invitation to go along with the First Nations people. And makarata means the coming together, you know, a peaceful thing. Well, actually, take it from someone who's grown up in the Territory, who knows all about traditional payback. Makarata is about a spear in the leg. It's a Yolngu term, and it describes a spearing in the leg to maim somebody who has done you wrong, traditionally so they could not walk or hunt anymore, to take care of themselves. I don't think I would like to expect non-Indigenous Australians to put themselves forward for any kind of payback. I'm not standing for that, and I'm sure as hell going to fight tooth and nail to make sure that that's not what the expectation is going to be on the rest of Australia.
Thank you, Jacinta. I'm not putting my hand forward for that either at the moment. You touched on your lived experience. Can you talk a little bit about, because one of the difficult things we see through footage on TV, the lived experience of Aboriginal Australians in places like the Northern Territory. And you know, we have to trust what we're told sometimes. Can you talk a little about your experience, the people of your community in the Northern Territory? How do they feel about the voice?
Well, a lot of people in remote communities don't know much about it. It's quite unfortunate because in the Northern Territory you have statutory authorities like the land councils who are all for a voice to Parliament, because while they're, you know, I mean, the land councils are like huge real estate agents for traditional owners. They're supposed to represent the interests of traditional owners, but they're organisations that receive, you know, multi-million dollar, even if not billion-dollar organisations that receive federal funding, that receive royalties to exist, and they're supposed to. They have a responsibility to our most marginalised. And you have to ask, well, if these entities are currently there and the lives of our most marginalised aren't improving, what the hell is going on? But they also are advocating for a yes vote, and they have heavy influence in remote communities. There are very vulnerable people in a lot of remote communities. Now, you know, I talked about my mother's circumstance where she was promised to be married in a polygamous marriage as a second wife to her older sister's husband. There are still people living within cultural confines, and these are issues that I've been very passionate about and talking about, because I have been a cross-cultural educator for a number of decades, and this is something that my family has done for the benefit of those living in those communities and the circumstances that they're under. Those people need to understand that they have choice, that they don't have to be confined to a way of life that no longer serves them, and that they are Australian citizens that should have the same right as each and every other Australian in this country to live a life that they choose, not that their culture dictates to them. So there are some who do recognise this. I had an elder come to me in Tennant Creek when I was there last, who said to me, Jacinta, don't worry, we know about this voice, we don't support it. Don't worry about what other people are saying, we don't support it. There's a whole raft of us in remote communities that don't want a piece of this, because they are those who have been left behind by these organisations that purport to advocate on their behalf but haven't been. So they know what's going on. So there are some who do know, but unfortunately there'll be some who'll be fed the fantasy that Labor are trying to push onto them, that this is all about supporting them, and that's just very unfortunate for them.
Thank you. Jacinta, one question that comes up a lot, particularly when we have this conversation with people who are maybe uninformed or trying to find out more. One of the questions that comes back is, well, what's the coalition's alternative proposal? What are you doing about it? And I think it's a fair question that we can answer to.
Yeah, so I mean, as I've spoken about, for me, and these are obviously considerations that discussions that we have to have. I mean, our focus is obviously primarily knocking this on the head, but what I would like to see is what I've suggested in terms of a forensic audit into the money and the organisations and the structures that currently exist. To improve them. And, you know, I think we as a coalition have often worked more practically and applied practical solutions to a lot of these problems. At the moment, Minister Linda Burney has a proposal sitting on her desk from a school in my community called Yipperinya School. The children that go to that school are most marginalised kids. They come from the town camps. They are often on the street at night. Sometimes they're picked up by police, and police will say to them, do you want to go home or do you want to go to school? This is at 6 o'clock in the morning. And they will say, take us to school, because home, they don't want to go home. Home is dangerous for them to go to. So the elders of this school provided Minister Burney with a proposal to build accommodation for these students and their staff so that they could have somewhere safe to sleep at night, with an education focus, with adults to take care of them that actually do care for their welfare, their education and their well-being. And she's failed to act on this proposal. There are many proposals like this that the government could act on right now if they wanted to, but they're playing politics, and they are so focused on this voice that they're telling us, you know, my voice isn't legitimate unless I go through a constitutionally enshrined voice as an Indigenous Australian. So there are proposals that we know exist that we could action right now, which this government simply isn't doing.
Now, this is my favourite question because it comes in, and thank you to everyone who's come into the office asking this. What can we do to help the no case win in the referendum?
Well, that's a good question. Now, I think some of you have already jumped on the bandwagon, have signed up to volunteer. I can see a few of these T-shirts getting about and a few hats, but if you go to Volunteer for No, to sign up, basically you'll be assigned tasks to help out the No campaign. But most importantly, when it comes to the ground game, in the 2 weeks, in the pre-polling and the leading up to referendum day, we would love your support to be out there handing out how to vote no, obviously, and also informing. Well, you know, I mean, Toowoomba's pretty informed. We might need to send you out to parts of the rest of the country, maybe to Melbourne and... yeah, I know, yeah, Victoria. Yeah. Got a feel for those Victorians, poor things. Yeah. But it's about, you know, spreading the message and, you know, and donating, you know. If you can only afford to pop in $2, $5, every bit helps. I mean, our campaign is being funded by grassroots, everyday Australians. We don't have the corporates and the elites funneling millions of dollars into our campaign. We're not trying to virtue signal. We're trying to fight on behalf of each and every Australian. And so I'm very grateful for the support that's already come our way financially from mums and dads, from grandmas who have put their hand in their pocket and said, you know what, take this. In fact, that's how I first started out being involved with Advance Australia. I think it was back in 2017 or 18, where I said, great, we've got a campaign group who are prepared to stand for Australian values. And I went, I'm popping $50 in there. And I got a phone call. Would you like to jump on board as one of our representatives? I said, I'm there. So that's how you can support the campaign going forward. Spread the message, you know, and again, stand up and be proud to be Australian. I think that's the most important ingredient to this fight.
Jacinta, one last question. Look, you've done shows like these around Australia. This is by far and away the biggest one you've done.
The biggest one, can I say?
We've got 1,400 tickets we sold here. I think the previous best was about 500. And I've got a colleague in Sydney who's trying to tell me he can do 900, but I'm telling him he's dreaming. Why is it? Why is it you've resonated so well here? You know Toowoomba well, you've been here, this is part of your life. Why is it that your message is connecting so well in a place like this?
I mean, I just think, well, you know, I've had a long relationship with Toowoomba. I've got some wonderful family here in Toowoomba that absolutely have my back. I've had many professional dealings with Toowoomba over the years. And I think it's just, your community is just one of those places that is there's a sense of community. I mean, you're quite large compared to somewhere like Alice Springs, but you've got a real sense of community and just that you still maintain those wonderful Australian values. That's what's so wonderful about Toowoomba. I mean, if we could replicate what goes on in Toowoomba all over the country, we'd have this in the bag, you know. I'd be laughing. I wouldn't have to campaign so hard and put my health at risk. But no, you know, there's hardworking, everyday Australians in this community, and you reflect, I think, as I said, those wonderful Australian values. So thank you.
And thank you, Jacinta. Ladies and gentlemen, one thing you won't know, the first time I met Jacinta, I think I walked into your office, you had your shoes off and you'd just come back from, I think, 3 weeks of hard campaigning and you were going to Canberra to take a rest. I don't know how that worked out for you because you do more work than anyone else down there. Ladies and gentlemen, it's so good to see so many of us here tonight and to see Toowoomba coming together. But one thing I think we can take clearly from Jacinta's message is Australia is divided. Australia is divided. This issue has divided Australia, and I think it's a terrible legacy for any Prime Minister to divide a country on the basis of race. This polling is showing we're torn in half. And if you want to know, look at who is supporting The Voice. We saw today another big corporate with Qantas coming out. We see celebrities, sports CEOs, your ABC with your tax dollars, by the way. You see the people who are supporting it are those who can afford to. Have a look at who's turning away from The Voice, who's saying no, who's looking for unity. Increasingly, it's middle and working class Australia. It's people who are already out there doing the hard work of keeping Australia together, keeping us working. You said you know, that the yes vote have the corporates, the big corporates. What we have is you, and I know who I'd rather have. But ladies and gentlemen, there is one place in Australia where there is, believe it or not, one place where there's 100% support for The Voice. It's down in Canberra when Labor and the Independents get together. They're not listening. They're not listening to the polls, they're not listening to you, because they don't want to represent you, they want to change you. Like Jacinta, I'm very proud to represent you. I'm very proud to be standing beside Jacinta, who comes at this issue with lived experience. I'll never pretend to have understood her life or to have lived it. I'm not going to pretend that I know better. Unlike Labor and the Independents, I see her as my equal. Whether I agree with her or not, we're both Australians, and that's a great thing to be. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's my absolute pleasure to give a vote of thanks for Jacinta. But first, I'm going to ask the gift bearers to come on stage. I said it was a family affair. Louise, Tyler, Ben, if you'd like to come out. And I'm going to embarrass Jacinta's husband, Colin. If you'd like to join us on stage, Colin. Colin, I want to take a moment to recognise your contribution to this campaign, your support, your love for Jacinta, and acknowledge what a huge toll this campaign must be having on your family, on your relationship, on the ability to spend time with the woman you love. I thank you, and Toowoomba thanks you. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a wonderful hamper that's been provided from donations from small businesses throughout Toowoomba, all across the place. We've got a few shout outs. There's Pittsworth Confectionery. I think we've got some stuff from Starman's there. We've got 6 of 1 beans, a whole lot. And Colin, you'll like this. The good people at Bandland have put a few picks, a couple of capos, a few straps in there, because we know you love your guitar. So we're looking after you too. So thank you very much, Colin. Jacinta, you are carrying a huge load in this debate, and it's hard for us all to see sometimes. You do your job with such energy and passion and conviction. Behind that is a regular Australian who's just out there trying to do the best she can, and I think it's absolutely amazing. But ladies and gentlemen, I truly believe the best way that we can show our gratitude to Jacinta is to help take some of that load for her. On the back of this booklet, there's a little QR code that will take you straight to that volunteer page that Jacinta was talking about. And I'm asking you tonight to join me in standing beside Jacinta, stand with me on pre-poll, and help us in our fight to keep Australia together. And if you need any help with that, will be people down the back wearing these beautiful shirts. I don't have one of the shirts that Mr. Albanese was wearing, but I've got plenty of these. If you'd like to grab one. But ladies and gentlemen, a thought to leave on, this referendum isn't about politics. It's not about red or blue. It's about keeping Australia together. And please join me in thanking our Jacinta.
Fantastic, everyone. I can see people are heading out, but what we've got up the back is we've got some fantastic Fair Australia core flutes. Feel free to grab some. If anything from tonight has really resonated and impacted you, and you really want to champion everything that Jacinta's talked about, we've got a QR code that will take you to the volunteering page on the back of this blue booklet. But thank you again for joining us, everyone. Please be mindful of traffic delays, travel home safe, and good evening.